He hadn't touched another woman's hand in 4 years. Not in that way. Not in the way that meant something. So when he walked into that restaurant and saw her sitting there, beautiful, composed, completely unaware of what she was about to say, Ethan Mercer had no idea that the next 2 hours would reach back 10 years into the worst night of his life and pull it, still bleeding, into the present. Some coincidences don't feel like coincidences. Some feel like something you were always moving toward, whether you wanted to or not. Yeah. If a stranger once sat beside you in the dark and talked you through the worst night of your life and you never knew their name, drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. Hit that like button, follow this channel, and stay with me until the very last word. Because this story, it doesn't end where you think it does. So, the restaurant was called Linden and Oak, and it was exactly the kind of place Ethan Mercer would never have chosen for himself. It had exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a chalkboard menu written in that deliberately imperfect handwriting that cost someone actual money to produce. The tables were small and close together, which meant every conversation bled into the one beside it, and the candles were the dripping kind that left waxy rings on the tablecloths. Romantic, according to people who still believed in that sort of thing. Performative, according to Ethan, who had not believed in much of anything for the better part of 4 years. He sat in the corner booth and checked his watch. 7:43. He was early, which he'd done on purpose. Arriving first meant he could sit with his back to the wall and see whoever was coming before they saw him, and that small tactical advantage was the only thing that had gotten him through the door. He ordered a water, looked at the menu, looked at his phone, looked at the door. Marcus had described her as someone you need to meet. Those were his exact words. Someone you need to meet, Ethan, not someone you might like, not someone who'd be good for you, someone you need to meet, like the universe had issued a directive, and Marcus Cole was simply the delivery mechanism. Ethan had said no 3 times before saying yes, and he'd only said yes because his daughter had looked up from her homework the night before and said, "Dad, you look tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix." And she was 8 years old, and she wasn't wrong, and that was somehow the most devastating thing anyone had said to him in years. He told Marcus fine. One dinner, he wasn't looking for anything. Marcus had said, "Nobody ever is." Her name was Vanessa Sterling, and Ethan had not Googled her, which Marcus had specifically asked him not to do, which was the first sign that something unusual was being orchestrated here. Marcus Cole was not a man who left things to chance. He was a corporate attorney with a planner for his planner and a backup for every backup. If he was asking Ethan to go in blind, there was a reason. So Ethan didn't Google her. He sat in the corner booth at Linden and Oak at 7:43 on a Tuesday in March, and he watched the door, and he didn't know anything about the woman he was waiting for except her name and the fact that Marcus had described her as someone who figured things out. At 7:51, the door opened. She wasn't what he expected. He didn't know what he'd expected. Something louder, maybe. Something that announced itself. Instead, she came in quietly, still pulling off a damp scarf, talking to the hostess in a low voice. And she looked around the room once, directly and efficiently, the way people look when they're used to walking into rooms where they don't know anyone and have learned to project calm they may or may not actually feel. She spotted him. He raised a hand. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite relief, not quite apprehension, something in between. She crossed the restaurant with the easy confidence of someone who moved through the world without apologizing for the space she took up. And Ethan clocked, in the time it took her to reach him, that she was younger than he'd thought, that her coat was expensive in the understated way that doesn't advertise itself, and that she looked like someone carrying a long week who had decided to carry it quietly. "Ethan?" she said. "Yeah." He stood, which felt overly formal the second he did it. "Vanessa?" "That's me." She slid into the seat across from him and set her bag on the floor and looked at him directly. "I hate this part." He blinked. "What part?" "The first 5 minutes, when you're both performing. I always say something weird right away to skip it." She picked up her menu. "So, I've said something weird. Now we can just be people." He sat back down. "Does that usually work?" "I don't know. This is the first time I've tried it." She looked up from the menu. "I'm usually terrible at blind dates." "I've never been on one." "Really?" My wife and I met in college. He said it simply, without flinching. He'd learned to say it that way. Clean, not self-pitying, not an invitation or a deflection. Just the fact. Something moved through Vanessa's face. Not pity, which he would have closed against, but something careful and genuine. And now? She passed. 4 years ago. I'm sorry. Thank you. He looked at the menu. So, what's good here? Heck, the food was actually good. Better than the decor deserved. They ordered. Vanessa got the roasted chicken and changed her mind twice before the server left. Ethan got the linguine and didn't change his mind, and somewhere between the breadbasket and the entrees, they stopped performing. It happened gradually. She asked him what he did, and he told her he was a structural engineer, which she found more interesting than most people did. And she asked him what he actually did in specifics, not the polite version. And he found himself explaining load calculations and why certain buildings move the way they do in wind. And she listened with the particular quality of attention that's different from just waiting for your turn to speak. I always assumed structural engineers were just very careful, she said. We are. But you're also, she paused, searching for the word, problem solvers, creative ones. Don't tell my colleagues, they have enough of a self-image already. She laughed. It was a real laugh, a little surprised, and he liked it more than he wanted to. She was 27, it came out, 5 years younger than him, which he'd guessed roughly. She ran a company called Arclux, which she explained was in sustainable packaging technology, and she said it the same way he'd talked about load calculations, assuming he'd find it boring, not finding it boring herself, leaving room for him to engage or not. He engaged. She was clearly sharper than she was letting on in these first careful minutes, and he could see the effort she was making to not fill every silence, to let the conversation breathe. Did Marcus tell you what I do? She asked. No, he didn't tell me anything. She raised her eyebrows. Nothing? Your name. That I should meet you. He told me you were a structural engineer, she said, and that you were honest. Is that a euphemism? Apparently not. He tore a piece of bread apart. He's known me since grad school. He's required to say nice things. He said you were the best person he knew. She looked at him steadily. He doesn't seem like someone who says things he doesn't mean. Ethan was quiet a moment. The candle between them threw uneven light. Across the restaurant, someone laughed too loudly at something, and the sound cut through and faded. He's a good friend, Ethan said finally. I haven't always deserved it. Vanessa nodded once, like she understood something specific about that. She took a sip of her wine. Can I ask about your daughter? He looked up. He told you about Lily? Just that you have her, and that she's young. 8, he said. He stopped, smiled in spite of himself. She's too smart for me. She asked me last week why we pay for things we already own, like, we own a house, why do we keep paying for it? And I started explaining mortgages, and she listened for 3 minutes and then said, so it's just a really long loan and the bank basically owns us. And I said yes, and she said, that seems wrong. Vanessa smiled. She's not incorrect. No, she's usually not. He looked at the table. She's the reason I came tonight, actually. Not Marcus. Really? It wasn't a question, so he didn't treat it as one. He just sat with it for a second, and she let him. She said I looked tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. He glanced up. She's 8. She shouldn't be noticing things like that. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Or, she said carefully, maybe it's okay that she does, that she sees you. He didn't answer that. He looked at the bread in his hand and put it down. Then their food came. They ate. The conversation moved through neutral territory. Her company's expansion into the southeast, his recent project on a mixed-use development in Midtown, the restaurant's acoustics, which were, as he noted, quietly terrible. And then it moved into something else. Something that happened in the way conversations sometimes do when you're not guarding yourself quite as vigilantly as you planned. She asked him if he'd grown up in the city. He had. Born and raised, though his parents had moved to Phoenix when he was in his 20s. His wife had been from Maryland, moved here for graduate school, stayed for him. She'd grown up in Connecticut, she said, New Haven. The kind of family that looked better from the outside than it felt from the inside, which she said simply, like it was just a fact and not an admission. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means my parents were functional, successful, present in all the ways you can be present without actually being there." She twisted the stem of her wine glass. "My mother ran a nonprofit. My father was a partner at a firm. We had nice things. We had the right schools. We had—" She searched for it, the scaffolding of a happy family. The structure was all there. Just no one living inside it. She looked at him. Yeah, exactly that. He thought about his own parents, his father who watched too much television and called it relaxing and meant it, his mother who baked when she was stressed, which meant his childhood kitchen always smelled like something was being processed through flour and butter. They'd been present in the chaotic, imperfect way of people who hadn't read any parenting books and didn't know they were supposed to. He said this, and Vanessa laughed. "That sounds," she started. "Loud. It was very loud. It sounds like actual life." He thought about that. Yeah, it was. It was over the second course. She'd ordered dessert, a lavender creme brulee that she ate 3 bites of before setting the spoon down. That she grew quieter, not withdrawn, thoughtful, in the way of someone deciding how much of something to say. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Sure. It might be weird." "You already told me weird was on the table." She smiled, but it was a small one, not the bright kind from before. "When Marcus asked me to do this," she paused, "I almost said no. I don't do this often. The dating thing. I don't do it often, and I'm not sure I do it well." "You're doing fine." "I'm performing well," she said. "That's different from fine." She looked at the table. "I'm good at performing well. I've been doing it since I was about 17. He watched her. Something in her voice had changed, not the words, but the way they were sitting in her mouth, like she was carrying them carefully. "What happened when you were 17? He asked. She looked up, not at him exactly, past him, at some point in the middle distance where the memory apparently lived. "I had a night," she said. "The kind of night that it's hard to explain what it does to you until you've had one, where everything you think you know about yourself gets completely rewritten and you can't see forward anymore. You can't see 2 hours ahead." She stopped. I'm not trying to be dramatic. I just don't have better language for it." "You don't need better language." He said it quietly. "I've had a night like that." She looked at him then, really at him. "I was 17, she said. "It was raining. I'd walked out of my house because I couldn't be inside it anymore. The specifics don't matter, a family thing, a bad one. And I ended up at this park, not far from where I grew up. There was a bench under a tree and I sat down on it even though it was wet, because I didn't—" She stopped again. "I didn't have anywhere else to go. I didn't know where else to put myself." Ethan went very still. "I sat there for a long time," she said. "I don't know how long. An hour, maybe more. And at some point a man sat down on the other end of the bench. I thought he was going to tell me the park was closing or ask if I was lost, but he didn't." She folded her hands on the table. "He just sat down. And after a while he started talking, about nothing specific. He talked about a building he was working on, some math problem he was stuck on. He talked about a diner he'd gone to that morning and the fact that they'd given him the wrong order, but it had turned out to be better than what he'd actually wanted, and he'd thought about that all day. He talked about nothing." She paused. "But he talked, and I listened, and I stopped." Her voice was steady, but barely. "I stopped going where I was going in my head. I just came back, and we sat there for maybe 2 hours, and at the end he said goodnight and walked away, and I don't think he ever knew." She looked at him. He was talking about his life, and I was saving mine. The restaurant continued around them. Someone asked for the check 3 tables over. A server dropped something in the kitchen, and there was a brief clatter, and then silence. Ethan looked at Vanessa Sterling across the small table with its dripping candle and its small white dishes, and he felt something happening in his chest that he didn't have a name for, something that felt like falling and like recognition simultaneously. And he said very carefully, "What city was the park in?" She blinked. "What?" "The park. What city?" "Here. Why are you what was the bench like? She stared at him. It was wooden, older, under an oak tree, I think, near the east entrance. There was a lamppost close enough that you could see the rain. The lamppost had a bent arm, Ethan said. From some kind of impact. Someone must have hit it. The light still worked, but it pointed slightly the wrong direction. Vanessa had stopped breathing. He could see it. I remember noticing that, he said. I thought it was funny that nobody had fixed it, that it was still doing its job pointing the wrong way. He looked at her. I was 22. He stopped, steadied himself. I just found out my wife was sick. Not a little sick. The kind of sick that means you start counting time differently. I got the call that afternoon and I walked for a long time and I ended up in the park because I didn't know where else to go either. Vanessa had both hands flat on the table. She was very still. There was a girl on the bench, Ethan said. Young, she was soaked through. I didn't want to leave her alone. She didn't look right. I didn't know what was happening with her. I couldn't go, so I sat down and I talked. I don't even remember what I talked about. I kept talking because it was the only thing I knew how to do with what I was carrying. And she was sitting there not leaving, and that felt like something, like company. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. You walked away, Vanessa said finally. You said goodnight, and you walked away. I didn't want to intrude. It felt like intruding, to stay. You'd already been there for 2 hours. I know. I watched you go, she said. I sat there and I watched you walk out under the lamppost and I thought, she stopped. Her jaw was tight. I thought, I'm going to be okay. That's what I thought, just from listening to you talk about a diner and math problems. That's what I thought. He looked at her. 10 years. 10 years, and she'd been 27 when they walked into this restaurant, which meant she was 17 then, which meant he was 22, and the math was simple and the math was impossible. 10 years between the bench and this table, between the rain and the candle, between two broken people who sat beside each other in the dark and didn't know each other's names. I didn't think about it as helping, he said. I wasn't trying to help. I was just trying not to fall apart. I know. Something moved across her face. That's why it worked. They didn't order coffee. They sat at that table for another hour after that admission, not because there was more to say right away, but because neither of them knew how to leave. The revelation had rearranged the room. It had rearranged everything. The ordinary awkwardness of a first date, the careful performance, the practiced distance, all of it dissolving into something stranger and more honest and harder to know what to do with. At some point, Ethan told her about Claire. Not everything, but the shape of it. The diagnosis, the year and a half of hoping and then not hoping, the morning in March when he'd sat on the edge of their bed and understood that the sound of the house had permanently changed. He told her about Lily, not the smart 8-year-old version he'd offered earlier, but the true version, a girl who'd grown up without a mother and handled it mostly by pretending very hard that she was fine, which she'd learned from him, which he wasn't proud of. He told her things he hadn't told anyone, and he didn't quite know how it happened except that she was sitting across from him with her hands on the table and she wasn't flinching and she wasn't filling the silences with the wrong things. And she told him things back. The family that looked good from the outside. She gave it specifics now. A mother who'd loved causes more than people. A father who measured worth in outcomes. A house where achievement was celebrated and everything else was quietly managed. The night on the bench had been the end of something, she said. She didn't say what. He didn't ask. I built Arclux when I was 20, she said. I know how that sounds. I had advantages. I had money. I had connections. I had the right school on my resume. I'm not pretending I did it from nothing. She looked at her hands. But I was terrified of stopping. If I stopped working, I'd have to... She didn't finish it. Be somewhere, he said. She looked up. Yeah, I know that, he said. That's just grief wearing a different coat. She was quiet for a long moment. You could have been a therapist, she said. I'm a structural engineer. I know, I'm complimenting you. He looked at her, the way she held herself, the careful way she'd maintained composure through the last hour, the tiny betrayal of her hands flat on the table. and he felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years, something he'd been reasonably sure he'd successfully dismantled and stored somewhere it couldn't cause problems. He felt interested in a person, in what she was going to say next. He felt the specific terror of that. Outside Linden and Oak, the March air was cold and damp, not raining, but close, the kind of night that smelled like rain even when there wasn't any. They stood on the sidewalk in that awkward post-dinner limbo where the conversation had been too significant for a handshake and too new for anything else. "I can't believe that was you," she said. "I've thought about that night, not constantly, but sometimes, when things got hard. I'd think about some stranger in a park who talked about a diner." "I wish I'd known," he said. "I would have—" He stopped. "I don't know what I would have done." Said something less mundane, maybe. The mundanity was the point. She looked at him. "You were real. Everything else felt—" She pulled her coat tighter. "Everything else felt like it was made of paper that night. You were just real." He looked at the street, at the light reflecting off the damp pavement, at the cars moving past, their headlights sweeping across the wet asphalt, and for a second the visual overlay of that park came back to him. The bent lamppost, the rain, the girl on the bench he'd thought was just someone having a bad night, who had apparently been having the worst night of her life while he hadn't known what to do with his own. "I'm glad I stayed," he said. "Me too." A cab moved past. Someone a block away was walking a dog that was not interested in walking. "I'm not—" he started and stopped. She waited. "I'm not in a good place for—" He tried again. "I know this is a weird thing to say after what we just, but I need you to know that I'm not in that place. I came tonight because my 8-year-old told me I looked tired and I couldn't argue with her, but I'm not—" "Ethan," she said it gently, "I'm not asking you to be." He looked at her. "I just found out that the stranger from the worst night of my life is standing on this sidewalk," she said. "I don't know what that means either. I'm not asking you to figure out what it means tonight." He nodded, looked at the street again. "Can we do this again?" she asked. "Dinner, I mean, or coffee, or—" She paused. "Or nothing, if that's what makes sense." He thought about Lily, at home with Mrs. Petrakis from next door, probably still awake and reading past her bedtime, probably not going to tell him she'd done it. He thought about the morning he'd walked into that park, 22 years old, carrying a diagnosis like a stone in his chest, not knowing where else to put himself. He thought about a girl on a wet bench who had looked not right and the choice to stay and talk about nothing. He thought about what Marcus had said. "Someone you need to meet." "Yeah," he said finally. "We can do this again." She smiled. The real one, not the first 5 minutes version. Small and a little uncertain and completely genuine. "Okay," she said. "Good night, Ethan Mercer." "Good night, Vanessa Sterling." She walked toward the cab she'd already flagged. He watched her go. At the last second before she got in, she turned back once, not long, just a glance, and then she was inside and the cab was moving and the brake lights flickered red at the corner, and then she was gone. He stood on the sidewalk a moment longer. The air smelled like rain. Across the city somewhere, a park bench was wet and empty under a lamppost that still pointed slightly the wrong direction. He put his hands in his pockets and started walking toward the train. He called Marcus at 10:47. Marcus picked up on the second ring. "How'd it go?" Ethan stood on the platform waiting for the uptown train and thought about the question. "She was on the bench," he said. There was a long silence. "What bench?" Marcus said, but something in his voice suggested he already suspected. "The bench. That night. After Claire's diagnosis. The girl in the rain." Ethan looked at the dark of the tunnel where the train would eventually come from. "Vanessa was 17. She was sitting on that bench when I got there. I didn't know. She didn't know." Marcus was quiet for 5 full seconds. "Ethan, I know. That's not in... I know. How is that? I have no idea." The train's lights appeared in the tunnel, far away, coming closer. "I thought you should know, since you arranged it." "I had no idea," Marcus said. "I swear to you I had no idea." "I know you didn't. Are you okay?" Ethan thought about the question in the way he'd been avoiding thinking about things for 4 years. directly and without protection. "No," he said. "I don't think I am." "Is that—" Marcus hesitated. "Is that bad?" The train pulled in. The doors opened. "I don't know yet," Ethan said. "I'll tell you when I figure it out." He got on the train, the doors closed, and the city moved past the windows, lit and dark in alternating strips, carrying him toward a daughter who was probably still awake and a house that still had a sound he was still learning to live inside. And somewhere across that city, a woman was in a cab thinking about a bench and a stranger and 2 hours in the rain 10 years ago. And he was thinking about it too, and neither of them had asked for any of this. And neither of them knew what came next, and the train moved on. The call came at 6:52 in the morning, 3 days after the dinner. Ethan was in the kitchen, making Lily's lunch, operating on autopilot the way he did most mornings. Bread out, peanut butter, the good strawberry jam, not the cheap kind, cut diagonally because she'd informed him at age 6 that triangles tasted better than rectangles, and he'd never tested the claim. His phone was on the counter, and he saw Vanessa's name on the screen and stood there with the knife in his hand for 2 full seconds before answering. "Hey," he said. "Hey." A pause. "Is this too early?" "No, I'm making lunch." At 6:52. Lily's school it's a whole thing. She has a thing at 7:45, and then, it doesn't matter. No, it's not too early. There was a brief silence that wasn't uncomfortable, which surprised him. He'd expected it to be uncomfortable. 3 days had passed since Linden and Oak, since the sidewalk, since the train ride home with the city moving past the windows, and he'd spent portions of those 3 days constructing reasons why the call probably wouldn't come, or why it was fine if it didn't. "I keep thinking about something you said," Vanessa said. He set the knife down. "Which part?" "The part about grief wearing a different coat." Another pause. "I've been turning it over. It's—" She stopped, and he could hear something shifting in her voice, like she was deciding how honest to be. "It's accurate in ways I haven't wanted to admit. I didn't mean it as an accusation." "I know. That's almost worse." A beat. Do you want to get coffee sometime? Not a date, or it can be a date if that's, I don't know what to call it. I just want to keep talking to you." Lily appeared in his doorway in her pajamas, hair thoroughly destroyed by sleep, looking at him with the quiet assessment of a child who had learned to read rooms. "That's Dad's date voice," she announced. "Lily, you're being careful with your words. You do that." He turned toward the counter. "Go get dressed." "Who is it?" "Lily." She retreated, but slowly, leaving the door swinging behind her. He put the phone back to his ear. Vanessa was laughing, not loudly, but he could hear it. "That's Lily," she said. "That's Lily. She sounds like a problem. She's my problem." He picked up the knife again. "Coffee would be good. Thursday?" "Thursday works." Thursday was a coffee shop called Depot on Clement Street, which was Ethan's choice and which he second-guessed for the entire morning before concluding he was being absurd. It was a coffee shop. It had good coffee and enough noise to make silence less conspicuous if things went sideways. Things didn't go sideways. She was there when he arrived, already seated with a ceramic mug in front of her and her jacket folded on the chair beside her. And she was reading something on her phone with her glasses on, which surprised him. He hadn't known she wore glasses, and she hadn't seen him yet, which gave him 3 seconds to exist in the strange space of seeing someone privately before they know you're looking. She looked younger with the glasses. She also looked less defended. "You wear glasses," he said, sitting down. She looked up. "For reading. I keep forgetting to wear them in public because I keep forgetting that I actually need them." She took them off and set them on the table. "It's a dignity thing. The glasses are fine." "Thank you. Keep them on the table anyway." He ordered a coffee. They sat. The morning crowd was loud around them in the good way, the background noise way, and they talked for 2 hours about things that mattered and things that didn't. Her company's current expansion strategy, which she described as simultaneously necessary and exhausting. His project on the Midtown development, which was hitting a sub-foundation problem he was turning over. The book Lily was currently obsessed with, which was a novel about a girl who discovers her grandmother was a spy, which Lily had informed Ethan was historically plausible, without being able to explain what that meant. Vanessa smiled at that. She reads historical fiction at 8? She reads everything. It's genuinely concerning. Last week she was reading the back of a cereal box and had follow-up questions about corn subsidies. Are you alarmed or proud? Both, always, simultaneously. It was easier than the first time, which surprised him, and apparently surprised her too, because she said so. Said, I thought this would be harder. And he said, I thought you'd cancel. And she said, I thought about it. And he said, me too. And somehow this was the most honest thing either of them had said. They met again the following Tuesday, and then the Thursday after that. It wasn't dating exactly, or it wasn't only dating. It was something harder to name, two people finding out the shape of each other, learning the dimensions, discovering where the walls were and how long it took to reach them. She was guarded about her family in ways she managed so smoothly he almost missed it. She'd redirect, ask a question back, acknowledge a subject, and then move past it so naturally that 3 exchanges later, he'd realized they'd moved past it. He did it too, with Claire, not with the facts, those he could say plainly now, but with the texture of it, the specific weight, the particular way grief lived in a house with a child in it. They both knew the other was doing it. That was strangely what kept it from being deceptive. 4 weeks in, she met Lily. It wasn't planned. He'd taken Lily to the farmer's market on a Saturday, their thing, the one Saturday ritual that had survived every hard year intact. And he'd texted Vanessa on a whim, the way you text someone when you're having a good time and want to include them in it without making it a significant gesture. And she'd replied within a minute, I'm 3 blocks from there. You serious? He'd been serious. She found them at the produce stand where Lily was engaged in a methodical evaluation of apples that she took, apparently, very seriously. Vanessa came up beside Ethan, and he introduced them, and Lily looked at her with the calm, unimpressed curiosity of a child who has learned not to perform for adults. You're the woman from the blind date, Lily said. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Lily, Dad talked about you. He said you were... She stopped, reconsidering. He didn't say a lot, but he talked about you, and he doesn't usually do that. Lily, it's a compliment, Lily said with total confidence. She turned back to the apples. These are the best ones, she told Vanessa, holding one up. Not because they're prettiest, they're a little dented, but they're the right weight and they smell right. Vanessa looked at the apple. She looked at Lily. Can I smell it? Lily handed it over with the gravity of someone conducting a lesson. Vanessa smelled the apple. Yeah, she said. That's the right smell. See? Lily said to Ethan, as if this proved something. He bought 4 of the dented apples. They walked the rest of the market together, Lily orbiting the conversation the way she did, sometimes ahead, sometimes a few paces back, but always within earshot, always aware. She asked Vanessa what she did, and listened to the explanation of sustainable packaging with the same focused attention she gave everything. So you make things that disappear? She said. Vanessa blinked. That's not exactly, well, yes, essentially. Is that sad? No, Vanessa paused. I hadn't thought of it that way, but no. The disappearing is the point. If it disappears cleanly, it worked. Lily considered this. That's kind of like good help, she said. You shouldn't notice it. Then she ran ahead toward a stand selling honey, and Ethan looked at Vanessa, who was looking after Lily with an expression he couldn't fully read. She does that, he said, says things, and then just moves on. I know. Vanessa's voice was quiet. She stopped. You've done well with her. He looked at the crowd ahead. Some days I think so. Most days? Most days I think I'm doing okay, and she's compensating for the rest. Vanessa laughed, small and honest. That tracks. Lily reappeared. This honey is from bees in the city, she reported. Urban bees. They wanted me to know that urban bees are better for biodiversity than people think. She held up a small jar. We should buy this for breakfast. They bought the honey. They had coffee at a table outside a bakery at the edge of the market, all 3 of them. and Lily ate a croissant with the methodical focus she brought to most things she enjoyed. And Vanessa talked to her about the bees with what Ethan could tell was genuine curiosity and not performance. And at some point, Lily looked up from her croissant and looked at Vanessa with the direct, undiluted assessment she reserved for things she was still deciding about. "Are you coming to more Saturdays?" she asked. Vanessa looked at Ethan. He looked back, neutral. "Maybe," Vanessa said. "If that's okay." "It's okay," Lily said simply. She went back to her croissant. Case closed. On the train home, Lily was quiet for most of the ride, looking out the window at the city going past. Then she said, without preamble, "She's careful." "What do you mean?" "Like she's checking everything before she touches it." Lily considered the window. "Like she thinks things might break." He looked at his daughter. "Yeah," he said. "She's had some things break on her." Lily absorbed this. "So have you." "I know. Maybe that's why you like her." He looked out his own window. "Maybe." Lily didn't push it. She leaned her head against the glass and watched the city, and he watched it too, and neither of them said anything else until they were home. The thing he didn't say to anyone, not to Marcus, not in the 3 a.m. ceiling-staring moments when things got loudest, was that every time he drove home from seeing Vanessa, there was a period, roughly 10 minutes, where it felt like something was being restarted that he'd thought was permanently off. Where the weight he'd been living inside felt like it might have a shape that wasn't just him. And then the 10 minutes passed and the weight was back, and he felt guilty in that specific and particular way he hadn't been able to stop feeling. The way that said, you are choosing something, and choosing this means choosing away from something else. Claire had been dead for 4 years. He knew, intellectually, that this wasn't abandonment. He knew that a therapist, and he'd seen one for 2 years after, and it had helped more than he'd admitted to himself at the time, would say that moving forward wasn't moving away. He knew all of this. He still felt it. He pulled into his driveway one night, 3 weeks after the farmer's market, and sat in the car longer than he needed to. And in the front window of his house, he could see the lamp on in the living room that he'd left on for himself, the warm yellow square of it against the dark. And he thought about Claire standing in that window the first winter they'd lived here, her hands wrapped around a mug, watching for his headlights. He sat in the car for 11 minutes. Then he went inside. Marcus called on a Wednesday. "I need to ask you something," Marcus said without preamble. "Okay. And I need you to not be weird about it. That's a terrible setup." "Ethan." A pause. "How are you actually doing with this? With her?" He was at his desk at work, the Midtown schematic spread across his second monitor, a cold cup of coffee at his elbow. He leaned back. "I don't know, he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the honest answer." Marcus was quiet a moment. "Is it the bench thing? Is that making it—" "The bench thing is—" Ethan stopped. "No. The bench thing is real, and it's strange, and I haven't fully processed what it means, but that's not what's—" He stopped again. This was the problem with talking to Marcus. The man was too smart and had known him too long and wouldn't accept the abbreviated version. "She makes it easier to be awake," he said finally. "That's the most accurate thing I can say. Spending time with her makes it easier to be a person." That sounds like a good thing." "It is. It also—" He looked at the schematics. Load distribution. The way weight moved through a structure. "It scares the hell out of me." "Because of Claire?" "Because I've lost things," Ethan said. "You know what I mean. You lose things that matter, and eventually you stop wanting to add more things that can be lost." Marcus was quiet. "I know," Ethan said. "I know what you're going to say." "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were going to say that not adding things because they can be lost isn't actually living." "I said I wasn't going to say it." "But it's true." "Yeah," Marcus said, "it is." He looked at the window across from his desk, the city outside, gray and February cold, the skeleton trees on the street below stripped to their structure. "She told me something last week," he said, "about when she was building the company. She said the hardest part wasn't the work. It was admitting that she wanted it to succeed so much that failure felt like personal, like it would mean something about her. What'd you say? I said that's just caring about something. And? And she looked at me like I'd said something profound and I wanted to tell her I hadn't. I was just stating a fact, but he stopped. She's not used to people stating facts about her like they're neutral. She's used to people either being impressed by her or scared of her. She's a billionaire, Ethan. I know. That tracks. I know. He picked up the cold coffee and put it down without drinking it. I'm not scared of her. I'm not impressed either. I mean, I am. She's remarkable. What she's built is genuinely remarkable. But that's not what I am when I'm with her. What are you? He thought about the farmer's market, Lily handing over the apple, the honey from the urban bees, the three of them at the bakery table, Vanessa watching his daughter with the look he'd been unable to fully read. Present, he said. Another silence from Marcus. Ethan. I know. I know. Okay, Marcus said. Okay, I just wanted to know you were paying attention to it. I'm paying attention to it. He turned back to his schematics. That's half the problem. Basse. 3 days after that call, Vanessa texted, I have news. Can you talk tonight? He'd been half asleep when it came in, Lily already in bed, the house in its quiet nighttime arrangement, and he read the text 3 times. I have news. It was the kind of phrase that could mean anything, and the kind of phrase that sat in the stomach wrong. He called her. Hey. Her voice was careful. Sorry, I know it's late. It's fine. What's the news? A pause. You know the expansion I've been working on, the Southeast markets? Yeah. The board shifted some things around, and there's an opportunity in Atlanta it's bigger than what we planned, significantly bigger. He waited. They want me to relocate, she said. Not permanently, necessarily, but at minimum 18 months, possibly longer depending on how the first phase goes. The house was very quiet. Outside his window, the street was empty, the lamppost on the corner doing its reliable job. When did this come up? He said. Last week. I wanted to think through it before I said anything. And? A longer pause. I haven't decided anything. I wanted you to know before I did. He sat with that. Before she decided. She was telling him before she decided because whatever happened between them was part of what she was weighing, which was either straightforward or terrifying depending on how long he let himself think about it. It's a good opportunity, he said. It's a great opportunity. Then, Ethan. Her voice was quiet. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you because... She stopped. Because it matters what you say. That's new for me. It's been a long time since what someone else said mattered in a decision like this. He looked at his ceiling. I don't know what to tell you, he said. I don't want you to go. He said it simply, before he could construct a reason not to. But I can't ask you not to. We're 6 weeks in, Vanessa. I don't have standing to ask you not to take a career-defining opportunity. I know. But I don't want you to go. I know, she said again, softer. They stayed on the line a while longer, not saying much else. The silence between them different from what it had been 6 weeks ago, less like a gap and more like a presence, something that had its own weight. Give me a couple of weeks, she said eventually, to figure out what I actually want. Okay. And in the meantime, a small pause. Can we have dinner Saturday? Yeah, he said. Saturday. He lay in the dark after they hung up and stared at the ceiling in the way he'd been staring at ceilings for 4 years, and the difference was that this time the thing on his mind wasn't loss. It was the possibility of it, which was, in its own way, so much harder. You can't grieve what hasn't happened yet. You can only stand in front of it and decide whether the risk of it happening is enough to make you turn back. He didn't sleep well. But he didn't turn back either. Saturday dinner was at his place. It had been Lily's suggestion, delivered with the kind of casual authority she deployed when she'd already decided something and was presenting it as a new idea. She'd said, You should cook for her. You cook better than restaurants. which was not true but was the sort of thing Lily believed because Ethan had been cooking for her since she was 4 and she had no meaningful frame of reference. He tried to explain this. She'd stared at him. He'd made pasta. Vanessa arrived at 7 with a bottle of wine and a small bag of the honey from the Urban Bees, which she'd found at another market and bought without telling him, and Lily received the honey with the gravity of someone accepting a tribute she found appropriate. "You remembered," Lily said. "You made a strong case for it." Lily put the honey on the kitchen counter with ceremony. "Dad's making carbonara," she said. "He burns it sometimes, but usually it's good." "I've never burned carbonara," Ethan said from the stove. "You burned it in December." "That was a different pasta entirely." "You called it carbonara." Vanessa sat at the kitchen island with her wine and watched them go back and forth with the quiet attention of someone who is making herself at home slowly, carefully, testing each step of the floor before committing weight to it. She and Lily talked while he cooked, Lily explaining the current state of her spy novel, the historical accuracy of which she had now researched to a degree that alarmed Ethan. And he listened from the stove and felt the strange, specific ache of something working, something fitting together, and didn't let himself look at it directly. Dinner was good. Lily ate with focus and reported that it was better than December. Vanessa laughed. Ethan conceded that December had been a difficult month. After, Lily did her homework at the kitchen table while they cleaned up, and there was a domestic rhythm to it, plates to the sink, Lily narrating something about a math problem she disagreed with on philosophical grounds, the sound of the water running, Vanessa drying a dish without being asked, that felt so ordinary it was almost unbearable. He was not accustomed to ordinary feeling like this much. Lily went to bed at 9, delivering a hug to Ethan, and then, with the unself-conscious directness of a child who has decided something, a hug to Vanessa too, brief and matter-of-fact. And then she was gone down the hall, and the house settled into its nighttime quiet, and Ethan and Vanessa were alone on the couch with their wine and the low lamp, and the silence that had its own texture now. "She's something," Vanessa said. "Yeah. You don't know how much she is yet, I think. You're too close to see it." He looked at his glass. "She's the best thing I've ever done." "It's not just what you've done?" "That's what I mean." Vanessa turned slightly toward him. "She's her own person, already, fully. That's not you. That's just who she is." A pause. "Though you probably gave her the conditions for it. Or I stayed out of the way." "That's part of the conditions." He smiled at that. She smiled back, and for a moment the whole weight of the conversation he knew was coming. Atlanta, the board, 18 months, possibly longer, sat off to the side like something patient. Then she set her wine down. "I've been thinking," she said, "about Atlanta. About everything." She looked at her hands. "Atlanta is the obvious thing. But what I've actually been thinking about is what it means that I'm thinking about it differently than I would have 8 weeks ago." He waited. 8 weeks ago," she said, "a relocation offer like this would have been not simple exactly, but clear. The math would have been obvious. Career against nothing, basically. But..." She paused. "The math is different now." "I'm aware. Does that scare you?" He thought about the ceiling, the 11 minutes in the driveway, the lamp in the front window. "Yes," he said, "but not for the reasons you'd think. Tell me." He looked at the lamp on the side table, the same warm yellow as the lamp in the window. "You asked me once if it was the bench thing, making this complicated. And you said no. It's not the bench thing, but..." He stopped, rearranged. "I've been carrying something for 4 years. You learn to manage weight by keeping it constant. You adjust to it. You build your structure around it." He glanced at her. "When you add something new, the weight shifts. The whole structure has to recalculate. And you're not sure the structure holds." "I know the structure holds." He turned toward her. "I'm scared of wanting it to." She was quiet a long moment. Outside, a car moved past on the street, its headlights briefly crossing the ceiling. "I'm scared of being too much," she said finally. I know how I come across. The company, the money, She gestured vaguely at herself, at the implied everything. "I've had people tell me in various ways that I'm a lot, that being with me is demanding, complicated. Who told you that? Someone who mattered. She said it simply. A few years ago. It ended badly, which is maybe generous to both of us. But the thing he said at the end was that he couldn't, that being with me always felt like being adjacent to something bigger, and he couldn't. She stopped. He said it was like trying to have a conversation in a room where someone else is always giving a speech. Ethan said nothing. I've thought about that a lot, she said. Not because I think he was right, but because I think I believed him more than I should have. He was wrong. You don't know that. You've known me 8 weeks. I know enough. He said it without drama, just a fact. Being around you isn't like being adjacent to a speech. It's like being around someone who thinks hard about things and doesn't apologize for it. That's not a lot. That's just yourself. She looked at him. Her expression was something he'd seen before, the careful assessment before she decided whether to trust, the checking of the floor before the weight. You're very, she started. Don't what? Don't deflect. You were about to say something like, you're very kind, and turn it into something smaller than it is. She closed her mouth. I'm not being kind, he said. I'm telling you a fact. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, stripped of the control she usually kept over it. I don't know what to do with you, she said. I don't mean that badly. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone easier to hold at arm's length. She looked at her hands again. I'm very good at arm's length. I know. You don't give me surfaces to push against. She exhaled. You just say things. He thought about the park, about being 22 and not knowing what to do with what he was carrying, and so just talking about whatever was actually in his head because silence felt impossible, about a girl on a bench in the rain listening. I've always been that way, he said. Claire used to say I was constitutionally incapable of subtext. Vanessa looked at him. She sounds like she was right. She usually was. Silence again, but the kind of silence that was working now, processing something. I don't want to go to Atlanta, Vanessa said quietly. That's the actual truth. The math looks good, the opportunity is real, and I don't want to go. She turned toward him more fully. I want to see what this is. I know we're 8 weeks in and I have a board and a relocation offer, and you have a daughter and a life, and saying I want to see what this is it sounds right, he said. She looked at him. It sounds like the right thing, he said again. But I need you to know something. He set his own wine down. I'm not good at this. I was out of practice before Claire died, and then I've been a father and an engineer and a person who gets through days for 4 years, and I make mistakes. I pull back when I should say things. I get in my head and stay there. I know. I'm telling you as a warning. I know, she said again. I do the same things. Mine just look more competent from the outside. Despite everything, he almost smiled. So we're both a mess, he said. We're both a mess, she agreed. He reached across and took her hand, which was not a planned gesture and which surprised him slightly in the doing of it. She looked down at their hands and then up at him and didn't move her hand away. Don't go to Atlanta, he said. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. They sat like that for a while with the lamp and the wine and the quiet house and Lily asleep down the hall, and it was not a perfect moment. It was just a moment, ordinary and real and fragile, and neither of them ruined it by saying so. He ruined it, of course, because that was the kind of person he was. Not that night. That night was fine. She left at 11. There was a long moment at the door that wasn't awkward so much as charged, and she kissed him once, brief and definite, and said goodnight and meant it. He stood in the doorway after she was gone and felt his heart doing something embarrassing and went to bed. He ruined it over the following 2 weeks, in the slow, methodical way of someone dismantling something carefully enough that each individual action looks reasonable. It started with the text he didn't send. She'd texted him a photo of a building she'd seen on the way to a meeting, old brick, ornate, water-damaged and patched in places, with a note. My version of what you do. Appreciate the bones. He'd looked at it for 10 minutes and typed 3 different responses and sent none of them. Then the call he kept short. She'd called on a Thursday, and he'd answered, but he'd been, he told himself, genuinely busy. The sub-foundation issue had escalated, which was true, but he'd also let the call end faster than she wanted it to, and known it while it was happening. Then the Saturday plans he made vague, and then vaguer, and then quietly dissolved. Marcus noticed first, because Marcus always noticed. "What are you doing?" he said on the phone on a Sunday. "What do you mean?" "Ethan, I've been busy. The Hargrove project is—" "What are you doing with Vanessa?" He was quiet. "I can hear you making a decision you're going to regret," Marcus said. "Walk me through it." "I'm not making a decision." "You're pulling back." He stopped, started again. "Something happened, and I needed to think." "What happened?" He sat on the edge of his bed, the same edge, the same room. "Lily asked me something last week. She asked me if Vanessa was going to be here for her birthday." He stopped. "Her birthday is in May. We're 2 months in, and Lily is she's planning around her. And if I let this go somewhere and it doesn't, Lily gets hurt. Lily gets hurt." He exhaled. "She's lost enough. I can't put her in a position to lose something else." Marcus was very quiet. "Say it," Ethan said. "I think you're using Lily." Silence. "Not consciously," Marcus said. "I think you genuinely believe what you're saying. I also think you're scared, and Lily is a reason that sounds noble and makes you feel less cowardly." Ethan wanted to argue and couldn't find the argument. "She's not just a shield," he said. "She's real. The risk to her is real." "Yes," Marcus said. "So is the risk to you. And you know how to live with your risk. You've been doing it for 4 years. You're not as sure you can ask her to take on yours." He didn't answer. "Am I wrong?" Marcus asked. "No," Ethan said. "You're not wrong. So what are you going to do?" He looked at his hands. At the ring he'd stopped wearing 2 years ago because it had started to feel like a lie he was telling in the wrong direction, not against Claire but against himself, against the fact of still being alive and needing to be. "I don't know," he said. He did know. He just wasn't ready to say it. He went to see Claire. Not an impulse. He went twice a year, on her birthday and on the anniversary, and this was neither, which made it different. He drove out on a Tuesday morning in late April, before work, and stood in front of her headstone in the pale spring light with his hands in his pockets, and felt the familiar arrangement of grief that he'd made a kind of peace with, the ache that didn't disappear but had learned to coexist with the rest of what he carried. He didn't talk out loud. He'd done that in the early years, and it had helped, and then it had stopped helping, and he'd stopped. Now he just stood there. He thought about Claire. Not the illness, not the end, but earlier. The way she'd looked at him in their first apartment when they'd had nothing, just the furniture her parents had donated and the desk lamp he'd had since college. The way she'd laughed at him when he was wrong, which was without mercy. The way she'd handled fear by making decisions, any decision, just movement, because paralysis was the only thing she truly couldn't bear. He thought about what she would say, standing here. She would not say something poetic. Claire had been allergic to the poetic. She would say, he could hear it almost, the tone of it before the words. She would say something like, "Ethan, you are using our daughter as a reason to not be alive. Fix it." He stood there a while longer. Then he got in his car and drove to work and spent the day on the Hargrove Sub-Foundation, and went home to Lily and made dinner and helped her with a history worksheet about trade routes and listened to her read 2 chapters of the spy novel. And at 9:15, after she was asleep, he picked up his phone and called Vanessa. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was careful. "Hey." "Hey." He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house. "I've been pulling back." A pause. "I know. I'm sorry." Another pause. "What happened?" "Fear," he said. That's the honest answer. I got scared and I hid, and I'm not proud of it." She was quiet for a moment. "I thought I'd said something, or done." "No." He was firm on that. "This was entirely me. You were right there, and I He stopped. I'm not good at this. Like I told you, I warned you. I know you warned me. Her voice was quiet, not cold. That doesn't make it easier. I know. I need you to not do that, she said. If you're scared, I need you to say that. I can handle scared. I can't handle silence. Silence is the thing that... She stopped. The thing that makes you feel like too much, he said. A long pause. Yes. I know. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. I know. I'm sorry, Vanessa. The line was quiet for a beat. I have something to tell you, she said finally. Her voice had shifted, still careful, but differently careful. Not guarded. Something else. Okay. The Atlanta decision, I told the board 3 weeks ago that I wouldn't relocate. She paused. But they came back last week with a revised structure. I'd maintain my role here, travel quarterly, and they'd bring in a regional director to manage the on-the-ground operations. He felt something unclench in his chest. That's good. It is. A pause. But there's a board meeting next month, formal vote, and one of the members, Renner, he's been pushing for full relocation or a leadership change. He's framing it as a commitment question. Her voice was steady, but he knew her well enough now to hear what was under it. I've built this company from nothing, and now there's a man in a room deciding whether my commitment is sufficient based on whether I'm willing to uproot my entire life. What does your lawyer say? She says we have a case if it comes to that. But legal fights take time and money and energy, and the optics of a founder fighting her own board. She didn't finish it. It's damaging regardless of outcome, he said. Yes. He sat with it. Outside the kitchen window, the yard was dark, the oak tree at the back a black shape against the slightly lighter sky. What do you need? He asked. A pause, not hesitation, something else, like the question itself had surprised her. I don't know, she said. I'm not used to being asked that. I know. He kept his voice level. But I'm asking. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, something in her had loosened slightly, some small piece of the architecture she kept up. I think I need someone to be on my side, she said. Not strategically. Not with advice. Just on my side. I'm on your side, he said. No hesitation. The silence after that was different from all the others. Ethan? Her voice was very quiet. Yeah. Don't pull back again. He looked at the dark yard, at the oak tree, at the small light from the lamp over the back door that he left on every night, so the yard wasn't completely dark. Some things you just kept on. Even when you were inside and didn't need it, you left the light on. I won't, he said. He didn't know if he fully believed himself, but he said it, and he meant it in the ways he could mean it, and he held the phone and listened to her breathe for a moment on the other end of the line, and then they talked about smaller things, her day, Lily's history worksheet, a joke she'd heard at a meeting that wasn't funny, but that she told him anyway, and it was ordinary in the way that was starting to feel less like a trap and more like something worth protecting. He didn't sleep well. But before he went to bed, he stood in the hallway outside Lily's room and looked at the strip of light under her door that meant she was still reading, and he knocked once. I know, she said. 5 more minutes. 10, he said. Then the light goes out. A pause. Okay? Then, Dad? Yeah. Is everything okay? He stood in the hall with his hand on the doorframe. It's getting there, he said. A pause. Good, she said, and meant it, and went back to her book. He stood there a moment longer. Then he went to bed, and this time he didn't stare at the ceiling. This time he closed his eyes and thought about the board meeting, about Renner, about what Vanessa would walk into next month with her back straight, and her voice steady, and her ability to take up space without apologizing for it, and what it would cost her and what it would mean if she came out the other side of it. He thought about a building, about how you calculated load, about how structures don't hold because everything goes right. They hold because someone designed them to take the weight of everything going wrong. He fell asleep thinking about that, which was not the most romantic thought he'd ever had, but was, he'd learned, the truest kind. The board meeting was on a Thursday. Ethan knew the time, 10 a.m., because Vanessa had mentioned it twice without meaning to, the way you mention things that are occupying too much of your internal space. He knew the location was the Arclux offices downtown, 14th floor, the conference room with the glass walls that she'd described once as a fish bowl, where the fish are all wearing expensive watches. He knew Renner's full name was Douglas Renner, that he'd joined the board 18 months ago through an investor acquisition, and that he had the particular quality of ambition that disguised itself as principle. He knew all of this, and he was in a site meeting in Midtown at 10 a.m., standing in a hard hat in a basement sublevel while his project manager walked him through the updated foundation survey, and he was present enough to ask the right questions and note the right problems. But part of his attention was 14 blocks south and 12 floors up, in a glass room with a woman who had built something from nothing and was now defending it to people who hadn't been there for the building. His phone was on silent. At 11:47, he felt it vibrate. He looked at it. A text from Vanessa. "It's done. Call me when you're free." 3 words that could mean anything. He read them 4 times in the 2 minutes before he could excuse himself from the site meeting, and each time they meant something different. He called her from the street, standing outside the site fence with the noise of Midtown around him. She picked up immediately. "Well," he said. A pause, long enough that he felt his jaw tighten. "We won," she said. Renner's motion failed. 4-2. He exhaled. "Vanessa." It wasn't clean. Her voice was steady but worn down, the steadiness of someone who'd been holding a particular posture for hours and was only now allowing themselves to drop it slightly. He had more support going in than I knew about. Hera was on the fence until the last 20 minutes. If she'd gone the other way, it would have been 3-3, and then it goes to a tiebreaker process that... She stopped. It was closer than it should have been, but it went your way. It went my way. A breath. My company is still my company. He stood on the sidewalk with a hard hat under his arm, and the noise of a city going about its business around him. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. "Tonight, wherever you want." A small silence. "Lily? Mrs. Petrakis owes me one." She laughed, real, the tired kind, the kind that comes out when you've been clenched for a long time and something finally releases. "Okay," she said. "But I want somewhere loud. I don't want quiet tonight. I want noise and bad lighting and too much food." "I know exactly where." The place was called Rosario's, which had been on the same corner for 40 years, and which operated on the principle that more was more in every dimension: portions, volume, the number of framed photographs on the walls, the number of opinions the waitstaff had about your order. Ethan had been going there since grad school, and it was his emergency restaurant, the one he went to when he needed a place that felt like it had absorbed enough human life to make his own feel less significant. Vanessa arrived looking like someone who had spent the day in a glass room being scrutinized and had decided, on the cab ride over, to be done with it. She'd taken her hair down from whatever it had been in. She looked tired and sharp-eyed and more herself than she did in the careful versions. She ordered a glass of red without looking at the menu. He ordered a beer. They got the chicken parm and the eggplant and a basket of bread that arrived before anything else, and she tore a piece apart and ate it like someone who hadn't eaten since early morning, which he suspected was accurate. "Tell me what happened," he said. She told him. Not the sanitized version, the real one, the inside of it. How Renner had opened with a governance framework argument that was technically sound enough to require a real rebuttal. How her CFO, Diane, had prepped her for most of it, but not for the specific angle he'd taken on international expansion liability, which he'd introduced in the first 10 minutes, and which required a pivot she hadn't fully rehearsed. How she'd pivoted anyway, because there wasn't an option not to. How she'd sat in that glass room for 3 hours and argued for her own company with the same precision she'd have brought to any external negotiation, because falling apart was not something she was going to do in a fishbowl. "And Hara," Ethan said. "Margaret Hara." Vanessa set her wine down. "She's been on the board for 6 years. She's sharp and she's fair, and she's the one I've always trusted to read a room correctly." She paused. "She almost didn't vote my way. What changed her?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "I said something I hadn't planned to say." She looked at the table. Renner made a point, his closing argument basically, that a founder who isn't willing to prioritize company geography over personal geography isn't a founder who can scale. He worded it more diplomatically, but that was the substance. She picked up her wine again. And I said that I had built Arclux from 12 employees to 400 in 7 years, and that the company's current valuation exists because I understood that sustainable growth isn't just about the product, it's about the people inside the structure, and that relocating leadership isn't a commitment test, it's a disruption. And I wasn't willing to disrupt this company's foundation because one board member had decided that geography was a proxy for dedication. He looked at her. Then I said that I had recently been reminded, she continued, that some of the most important decisions you make are the ones about where you stay. She met his eyes. I didn't explain that. I just said it. He was quiet for a moment. Did it work? Hara voted my way. She shrugged, but it wasn't a casual shrug. It was the shrug of someone still processing. So, apparently, the food came, they ate. The restaurant was loud around them in exactly the way she'd wanted, full of other people's conversations and the sound of a kitchen that didn't operate quietly, and a server with strong opinions about whether they'd ordered enough, which they had, but appreciated the concern. They talked about smaller things for a while, the way you do after large things. She asked about the sub-foundation issue. He explained it in enough detail that she asked 3 follow-up questions that showed she'd actually been listening, not just politely waiting. She told him about something Diane had said after the meeting, funny in the way things are funny, when adrenaline has left the body and relief has not quite filled the space yet. And then, over the last of the wine, she said, I need to tell you something. He set down his fork. Not bad, she said immediately, reading his face. Or, I don't know what it is. I just need to say it. She looked at the table, then up at him. When I was in that room today, and Renner was making his argument, there was a moment, maybe 10 minutes in, where I thought, he might actually be right. Not about the geography, about the other part. She stopped. I have run this company in a way that has not left room for much else. And I chose that. I made that choice deliberately because other things had... She paused. Because other things had been difficult, and work was not difficult in the same way. Work had clear metrics, clear outcomes. You put in, you got out. People are messier. People are messier, he agreed. I've been using the company the way you used grief, she said, as a structure, a load-bearing wall. She looked at him directly. And I don't want to do that anymore. But I also don't know how to not do it, because I've been doing it for 10 years and it has worked in the ways I let myself measure. He thought about the load-bearing wall, about structures that hold because of what's in them, not just around them. You don't have to stop working the way you work, he said. That's not what any of this is asking. I know that intellectually. But I spent today fighting for a company, and I came out the other side, and the first person I wanted to call was you. She said it plainly, without performance. Not Diane, not my lawyer, you. And that's... She stopped. That's a significant data point. He looked at her across the table. The tired eyes, the hair down, the woman who had walked into a glass room this morning and held her ground for 3 hours and come out to a loud Italian restaurant because she didn't want quiet tonight. I'm glad you called, he said. I know. She almost smiled. You keep saying things like that. They keep being true. She did smile then. Small, genuine, the one he'd learned to wait for. May arrived with Lily's birthday and the question of Vanessa's attendance, which Lily had raised in April and which Ethan had handled badly by saying they'd see, which Lily had correctly identified as avoidance and called him on directly. You said we'd see in February about whether I could get the extended library card, she'd said, standing in the kitchen doorway with the particular energy of a child making a legal argument. We saw. I got the card. You use will see when you think the answer is yes, but you're not ready to say it. He'd looked at her. So is Vanessa coming to my birthday? She asked. If she wants to, he said. I'll ask her. You should ask her. I said I would. You should do it before you talk yourself out of it. Lily turned back down the hall. I know how you are. She was 8 years old. He had no rebuttal. He asked Vanessa. She wanted to come. He said good. She said she'd like to bring something if that was okay. He said it was okay. She showed up the afternoon of Lily's birthday with a telescope. Not a child's toy telescope, but a real one, compact and well-made, with a tripod and a guide to constellations, which she presented to Lily with a note that said, "For someone who already looks at things more carefully than most adults, the sky has a lot to look at." Lily read the note twice. Then she looked up at Vanessa. "Do you know the constellations?" she asked. "Some of them, not all." "We could learn together." "I'd like that," Vanessa said. Ethan stood in his kitchen doorway watching his daughter and this woman examine the telescope together, and he felt the thing again, the specific ache of something working, and this time he looked at it directly. He let himself look at it. He stood in the doorway and he felt it, and he didn't immediately start calculating what it would cost. The party was small, 4 of Lily's school friends, Marcus and his wife Jen, Mrs. Petrakis from next door, who considered herself an unofficial grandmother and had brought a cake that was technically too large for the guest list. Vanessa navigated it the way she navigated most things, carefully at first, finding the room, and then settling into it once she had her bearings. She talked to Jen for 20 minutes about something that made Jen laugh twice. She ate 2 pieces of cake without being persuaded. She got into a conversation with Lily's friend Priya about whether space was infinite that became, in Priya's telling, the best conversation she'd had in weeks, and Priya was 8 years old. Marcus appeared at Ethan's elbow at some point during the afternoon, holding a cup of coffee, watching the room. "Don't say it," Ethan said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You have a face." "I have a face," Marcus agreed. "It's a positive face." Ethan watched Vanessa help Lily adjust something on the telescope tripod, both of them crouched over the mechanism, Lily explaining something with her hands that she apparently felt required full-body illustration. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Marcus sipped his coffee. "You look less tired," he said, "in the way sleep doesn't fix." Ethan looked at him. "I'm not being cute," Marcus said. "I'm just telling you what I see." Ethan looked back at the room. "I know," he said again. After the party, after Lily's friends had gone home and Mrs. Petrakis had wrapped up the leftover cake with the authority of someone who had decided it was hers now, and Marcus and Jen had said their goodbyes, Vanessa stayed to help clean up. It wasn't discussed. She just stayed. The way you stay when leaving would be the wrong thing. And she and Ethan moved through the kitchen in the easy way of 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms, and Lily sat on the counter eating the last of the frosting off a fork and narrating the social dynamics of the afternoon with the analytical clarity that she brought to everything. "Priya liked you," she told Vanessa. "I liked Priya. She doesn't like most adults. She thinks most adults aren't actually interested in things." Lily considered this. "She's right, usually." "I was interested," Vanessa said. "Space is genuinely interesting. Most people say it is, but they don't mean it." Lily looked at her directly. "You meant it." "I did." Lily nodded, case settled, went back to the frosting. Later, after Lily was in bed, she'd asked Vanessa to say goodnight, which Ethan had watched from the doorway, Lily lying in bed with the constellation guide open on her stomach. Ethan and Vanessa stood on the back porch in the May evening with the oak tree at the yard's edge dark against the sky, and the air finally warming into something that didn't require a jacket. "She's going to know every constellation by August," Vanessa said. "By July," Ethan said. She laughed. They stood there a while. "Thank you for today," he said. She turned to look at him. "Thank you for asking me." He looked at the yard, at the lamp over the back door, at the oak tree and the sky behind it, which had a few stars in it now, visible even through the ambient city light, if you knew where to look. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "What I said on the phone, about not pulling back again." He turned toward her. "I want to say it differently, more specifically." He looked at her, at the careful, guarded, brilliant, imperfect person who had sat on a bench in the rain at 17 and saved his worst night without knowing it. "I spent 4 years building a life that was safe. Not empty. Lily is not empty. My work is not empty, but safe, contained. I didn't want things I could lose. He stopped. I've started wanting things again. That scares me, and I'm going to handle it imperfectly. I'm going to pull back sometimes, probably. I'm going to get in my head. I'm going to be... He stopped again, searching. I'm going to be exactly as difficult as I am. She was very still. But I'm not going anywhere, he said. That's what I want to say specifically. I'm staying. Whatever this is, I'm staying in it. She looked at him for a long moment. The light from the back door lamp crossed her face at an angle. I have something I need to say back, she said. Okay. She stopped, started again. The version of me you've met is mostly accurate, but I'm more difficult than I've let on. I compartmentalize in ways that make the people around me feel shut out, and I don't always know I'm doing it. I set expectations, I don't communicate, and then I'm disappointed when they're not met, she exhaled, which is completely unreasonable, and I'm working on it, but I haven't fixed it. I don't sleep well. I overwork. When I'm stressed, I become efficient in ways that feel cold. She held his gaze. I'm telling you because you were honest with me, and I owe you the same. I know most of that already, he said. I know you know some of it. I know most of it, he said again, and I'm staying. Something moved across her face, not the relief exactly, but something behind it, something deeper, the expression of a person who has been braced for an impact that doesn't come. He crossed the small distance between them and kissed her, not the brief, definite kiss from 3 months ago, but something that said more than that. That said, I mean this specifically, not in general. And she kissed him back and her hands came up against his chest, and neither of them was careful about it. When they broke apart, the yard was the same yard. The oak tree was the same tree. The lamp was still on. Okay, she said, a little unsteady. Okay. Yeah, he said. She leaned her forehead briefly against his shoulder just for a second, the specific gesture of someone allowing themselves to rest somewhere. Then she straightened and looked at the yard. Stars, she said. Lily's going to need to practice with the telescope. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. The Renner situation did not resolve quietly, because things involving men like Douglas Renner rarely did. 3 weeks after the board vote, word came through Vanessa's lawyer that Renner was pursuing a minority shareholder complaint, which was his right and which was also, as her lawyer explained with barely concealed irritation, a tactical move more than a legal one, designed to generate friction, cost time and money, create the kind of institutional uncertainty that could affect upcoming partnership negotiations. She called Ethan on a Sunday evening. He was on the back porch. Lily was inside. He's not going to stop, she said. Her voice was controlled in the way he'd learned to read, the flatness that meant she was managing something large. What does your lawyer say? That we file a response, document everything, and make the cost of continuing this higher than the cost of stopping. A pause. Which means months, and energy, and... She stopped. And it's exhausting, he said. Yes. A breath. I'm tired of defending what I built to someone who showed up 18 months ago and decided he understood it better than I do. He was quiet a moment. Do you want to talk through the legal side, or do you just want to be angry for a minute? A pause. Then, can I just be angry for a minute? Yes, he said. Go ahead. She was quiet for 3 seconds. He's wrong, she said. Not just strategically. He's wrong about what this company is and what it takes to run it and what commitment actually looks like when it's not a performance. He sat in that room and used a word like it was a measuring stick when he has no... She stopped. He doesn't know what I've given this. He doesn't know the nights or the decisions or... She stopped again. He doesn't know, Ethan said. No, but you do. A longer pause. Yes. And the people who built it with you know. Yes. Then his version of it doesn't change the actual thing, Ethan said. He can fight the paperwork. He can't change what's real. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, the flatness had cracked slightly in the direction of something more human. You know what the worst part is? What? For about 6 hours after my lawyer called, I second-guessed myself. Not the decision. I know the decision was right, but just whether I'd handled it correctly. Whether I'd been too direct in the meeting, whether I'd made an enemy I could have made an ally. Whether... She stopped. Whether I was the thing he said I was. You're not. I know that now. But for 6 hours, that's not weakness, he said. That's just having a conscience. People without consciences don't second-guess themselves. The line was quiet. Come over, she said. Not tonight. I know it's late. But tomorrow. Can you come tomorrow? Yes, he said without hesitating. Okay. A breath. Okay. Good night, Ethan. Good night. He sat on the porch after they hung up, in the warm June dark, with the oak tree and the lamp and the stars that Lily was learning to name. He thought about structures again, about how you calculate for load, for stress, for the unexpected force that hits from a direction you didn't model, about how buildings don't stay standing because nothing tests them. They stay standing because someone, before any of it, made sure the bones were right. He thought about Vanessa in a glass room defending what she'd built. He thought about Lily holding a constellation guide. He thought about a bench in a park 10 years ago. 2 people in the dark who hadn't known each other's names. He sat there until the night got cool and the lamp over the back door did its reliable job, and the oak tree was just a shape against the sky. Then he went inside and turned off the lights and checked on Lily, who was asleep with the constellation guide open on her chest. And he took it gently and set it on her nightstand and stood there a moment in the dark of her room. He had made something, somehow, despite everything. He had made this, the house, the child, the oak tree, the lamp. And he was making something else now, carefully, imperfectly, with a woman who checked the floor before she put her weight down and who was learning, slowly, that it would hold. He wasn't sure of much. He was sure of that. He turned off her light and went to bed, and this time he slept straight through. The Renner complaint took 4 months to resolve. Not 4 clean months, 4 months of Vanessa's lawyer filing responses and Renner's lawyer filing counter-responses, of depositions that ate whole days, of a particular Tuesday in August when Vanessa sat across from Ethan at her kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night with a stack of documents she'd already read 3 times and said, "I'm so tired of this," in a voice that was not dramatic, just completely honest, the voice of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and is acknowledging the weight without setting it down. He'd made tea. He was bad at making tea. He was a coffee person. She was a tea person. And he'd been learning her preferences over the months the way you learn someone's preferences when you're paying attention. And he made it wrong, too strong, and she drank it anyway without complaining, which he'd learned was one of her ways of saying thank you. They'd gone through the documents together. He wasn't a lawyer and he didn't pretend to be, but he was good at structure, at seeing how parts connected and where the load-bearing points were. And she talked it through with him, not because she needed his legal opinion, but because talking it through out loud helped her find the places where her own argument was weak. He asked the questions a skeptic would ask. She answered them, and in the answering found the answers she'd actually use. It was, in its way, the most intimate thing they'd done. The complaint was dismissed the second week of September on procedural grounds that Vanessa's lawyer described as the legal equivalent of being thrown out by the bouncer before you even make a scene. Renner retained his board seat, but lost significant standing with the other members, who had watched the process with the polite, careful displeasure of people who considered their time valuable. Hera called Vanessa personally to say she was glad it was over. Vanessa texted Ethan from the parking garage outside her lawyer's office. "It's done. Really done this time." He was in a site review. He stepped away from his project manager mid-sentence, which he'd never done in his professional life, and texted back, "How do you feel?" The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice before she answered. "Like I could sleep for a week, and also like I want to celebrate, and also like I want to never think about it again. All at once." He typed, "That sounds right." Then, "Dinner Saturday. Your choice this time." She chose Rosario's again. He'd expected somewhere nicer, given the occasion, and when he said so, she said, "Rosario's feels like winning. The other places feel like performing winning." He didn't argue. October came in cold and fast, the way it sometimes does in a city that doesn't transition gently between seasons, and with it came the settled feeling that follows a long period of uncertainty. Not peace exactly. Ethan had learned to be suspicious of peace as a permanent state, but something like equilibrium. The ground was recognizable again. Vanessa's company moved into the fall quarter with the Southeast Partnership restructured and Renner effectively sidelined, which meant her attention shifted back to the actual work rather than the defense of it. And he'd learned this about her, most fully herself when she was working. Not the defended, careful version she deployed in unfamiliar rooms. The real one. The one that got excited about problems and talked about solutions with her hands and called him at 7 a.m. because she'd been thinking about something and wanted to say it before the day got loud. He loved that version. He hadn't said so, not exactly, not in those terms. But he knew it, in the private way you know things before you've found the language. Lily had named 7 constellations by the end of July and 14 by October and had started a notebook in which she recorded her observations with a rigor that Ethan found both admirable and slightly unnerving. She wrote the date, the time, the cloud cover, the temperature, and then her notes, which were a mixture of factual observation and editorial commentary that read like a field journal written by someone who had both scientific ambitions and strong opinions. On one page, Orion is overrated. Everyone knows Orion. Cassiopeia is harder to find and more interesting. On another, asked V about the telescope's focal length tonight. She looked it up and then explained it correctly. She does that. Admits when she doesn't know and then actually finds out. Most adults don't do the second part. V, in the notebook. He'd seen it over Lily's shoulder and hadn't said anything. Vanessa had not seen it. He wasn't ready to show her yet. Not because it would be unwelcome, but because some things needed to be carried a little longer before you handed them to someone else. It was a Saturday in late October when Ethan suggested the park. Not casually, he'd been thinking about it for weeks, turning it over, deciding whether it was too much, whether it was the kind of thing that would feel constructed and therefore hollow. He'd concluded that it would only feel constructed if he made it into a production, and that if he just said it plainly, it might be something else. So he said it plainly. They were at the farmer's market, their thing now, the 3 of them on most Saturdays. And Lily had gone ahead to the honey stand as she always did, and he said to Vanessa, "I want to show you something later, after lunch, if you're up for it." She looked at him. "Show me what?" "The park." She went still for half a second, just half a second, and then she was moving again, but he'd seen it. "Okay," she said, "we don't have to." "Okay," she said again, "I want to." They had lunch at the bakery table, the 3 of them. Lily had the honey and an opinion about the bread quality and a question about whether cloud formations could be used to predict weather with any actual accuracy, which led to a conversation that lasted through most of the meal. Ethan watched Vanessa answer the question. She'd looked up atmospheric science at some point in the past weeks, he realized, because her answer was specific and accurate, and she'd clearly done it to be prepared for exactly this kind of Lily conversation. And he felt something so large and quiet that he didn't have a word for it and stopped looking for one. After lunch, they walked to the park. It was 3 blocks from the market, which they hadn't known when they started going to the market, or maybe hadn't let themselves know. It was a city park, medium-sized, with an east entrance that opened onto a path lined with trees that had gone fully October gold by now. And they walked in through the entrance, and the path curved, and the sounds of the street faded to something lower and further away. Lily walked ahead of them, scuffing through the leaves with the focused enjoyment of a child who has not yet decided that enjoying leaves is beneath her. Ethan and Vanessa walked beside each other, not quite touching, and neither of them spoke much. He knew where the bench was. He'd always known, the way you know where something important is even when you're not going there. East side, near the path's curve, under an oak tree that had gotten bigger in 10 years. The lamppost beside it. The arm that was still slightly bent, still pointing the wrong direction, and which had apparently outlasted whoever might have fixed it because it was just like that now, just the way it was, permanent in its small imperfection. Vanessa saw it before he said anything. He watched her see it, the pause in her step, the way her eyes found the lamppost first, then the bench, then the oak tree, taking inventory of what matched the memory. "There it is," she said very quietly. "Yeah." Lily had noticed they'd stopped. She came back toward them, looked at the bench, looked at both of them, and understood with the quick intuition she had for the weight of adult moments that something was happening that she should be quiet inside of. "Is that the bench?" she asked. He'd told Lily, not everything, not all the details, but enough. Enough that she knew about the park and the night 10 years ago and the stranger who had turned out not to be a stranger. Lily had processed this information with characteristic thoroughness and then said, "So you helped each other before you knew each other," which was the most accurate summary of it he'd heard. "That's the bench," he said. Lily looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Vanessa. "Are you okay?" Vanessa looked down at her. "Yeah," she said, "I'm okay." "We can go sit on it if you want," Lily offered with the practical kindness of a child who has decided that the solution to most things is to just do the thing. "It's just a bench. It's nicer now that we know about it." Vanessa made a sound that was almost a laugh. She looked at Ethan. He gestured toward the bench. They went and sat on it, all three of them. Lily in the middle, which she'd positioned herself into with unconscious authority, her legs swinging because they didn't reach the ground. The oak tree above them had shed most of its leaves, but not all. The ones remaining were the gold brown of late October, catching the afternoon light. The lamppost stood to their left, its bent arm pointing slightly skyward, and to the right of where it should have been pointing, doing its job regardless. Vanessa looked at it. "I used to wonder," she said, "whether the person who sat next to me that night knew, whether they had any idea what they'd—" She stopped. "I thought about looking after, finding out who it was, but I didn't know anything about him, just that he was young, he was an engineer, and he'd been to a diner that morning that got his order wrong." She turned to look at the lamppost. "I thought about diners for years." "That's the most specific thing to remember," Ethan said. "It was the most human thing you said." She looked at him. "You weren't talking about ideas or plans. You were talking about eggs, and how the wrong eggs had turned out to be better." She held his gaze. "That's what made me believe you were real, that you were paying attention to small things." He thought about that morning. He'd been 22, and he'd had the call from Claire's doctor the afternoon before, and he'd spent the night not sleeping, and in the morning he'd gone to the diner on the corner because he didn't know what else to do with himself, and they'd brought him someone else's order, and he'd been too depleted to send it back, and it had actually been good. He remembered thinking that. He remembered thinking, even today something can be unexpectedly okay. He hadn't known he was going to carry that thought to a park bench and hand it, unknowing, to someone who needed it. "I didn't know it mattered," he said. "That's why it did." Lily looked between them. She'd been following this with the careful attention she brought to things she considered important. "So you were both sad," she said, "and you made each other less sad, without knowing." "Yeah," Ethan said, "that's what happened." Lily considered this. "That happens sometimes," she said. "In the spy novel, there's a chapter where two people save each other from different things at the same time and don't realize it until later." She looked at the lamppost. "I thought that was just something authors made up." "It's not," Vanessa said. Lily nodded. "Okay," she said, satisfied. She went back to looking at the leaves, scuffing one with her shoe, already partly moved on in the way of someone who had filed the information and integrated it and was ready for what came next. Ethan looked at the lamppost, the bent arm, the light that would come on when the evening got dark enough, pointing slightly the wrong direction, lighting up the wrong patch of sky. He thought about the night 10 years ago. He'd been so gutted he hadn't felt like a person. He'd walked through the city for hours because standing still was impossible, and going home was worse. He'd ended up here, at this bench, for no reason he could name, just the oak tree and the lamp and the wet bench that was somewhere to put himself. And there had been a girl hunched at the other end, soaked through, not looking at him. And he'd thought, "I can't leave her here." And so he'd talked, and she'd listened, and they'd both, without knowing it, done what they needed to do to get through the night. There was something in that, not magical, he'd never been a person for that word, but something about how presence mattered more than intention, about how you could do an important thing without understanding its importance, about how the kindness that changes a life rarely announces itself as kindness at the time. It's just a person sitting down. It's just a person talking about eggs. He thought about Claire. He did this less destructively now than he used to, less like picking at something and more like visiting. She'd have liked Vanessa, he thought. Not immediately. Claire had been skeptical of competence that looked effortless, had needed to see the seams before she trusted the garment. But she'd have found them. She'd have looked at the way Vanessa admitted not knowing things and then actually found out. The way she talked to Lily without performing for her. The way she made tea for 3 people and got all 3 orders right without being asked. Claire had always respected people who paid attention. He thought about the life they'd had together and the life that had come after, and the space between those 2 things, the 4 years of surviving, and how surviving was something he'd gotten good at without meaning to get good at, because there wasn't another option, and Lily needed him upright. He thought about the night at Linden and Oak, the awkward booth, and the dripping candle, and the woman pulling off a damp scarf, and the 10 years between that and this bench, and all the ordinary days in between that neither of them had known they were moving through toward each other. He wasn't a man who believed in forces that arranged things. He was an engineer. He believed in structure and calculation and the behavior of materials under stress. But he believed in this, that choices accumulate, that the decision to stay on a bench, to keep talking, to not leave because leaving felt wrong, that those small decisions had weight. They didn't guarantee anything, but they mattered. Every structural failure he'd ever studied came down to something small, some incremental compromise in the wrong place. And every structure that held did so for the same reason. Someone made the small right choices before the weight arrived. He'd made one that night without knowing what it would cost him or give him. Just stayed. "Can I say something?" Vanessa said. They were still on the bench. Lily had migrated a few feet to investigate something at the base of the oak tree, a cluster of acorns she'd apparently decided required cataloging, and Ethan and Vanessa were briefly beside each other in the way of adults whose child has given them a sliver of private space. "Say it," he said. She looked at the lamppost. "I think I've been waiting to feel safe enough to stop performing for so long that I forgot what it felt like to just be somewhere." She paused. "And then you and Lily." She stopped again, and he could see her finding the words carefully, not the professional words, the real ones. "I don't know how to explain what it's like to sit at someone's kitchen counter and watch them make pasta badly and feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I've had larger rooms, better food, more impressive evenings." She turned to look at him. "I've never had that." He held her gaze. "Neither have I. Not in a long time." "I know you loved Claire." She said it without flinching because she'd learned to say it that way. Not as a competition, not as a displacement, just as a fact about his life that she'd made room for. "I know she's in this. She's in Lily. She's in the person you became." A pause. "And I'm not asking you to, you're not replacing anything," he said. "That's not what this is." "I know," she exhaled. "I just needed to say it out loud." "I know you did." She looked at the oak tree, at Lily crouched at its base with an acorn in each hand comparing them. "She's going to want to bring those home," Vanessa said. "She's going to want to measure them and document the difference and probably name them," Ethan said. "She's going to name acorns?" "She named the telescope." Vanessa turned to look at him. "What did she name it?" "Copernicus." He paused. "She said it deserved a name that had historical weight." Vanessa stared at him for a second. Then she laughed, the real one, full and unguarded, the one that still caught him off guard because it was so different from the careful, restrained smiles she'd deployed in the first weeks, the ones that had felt like permissions granted rather than feelings expressed. This one was just the laugh, uncalculated, coming from somewhere that hadn't been defended. He loved that laugh. He'd say so, eventually. Not today. Today had enough in it already, but eventually, when the moment was right and he wasn't worried about the weight of it, he was going to say it plainly because he was constitutionally incapable of subtext, and she'd been warned. "Copernicus," she said, still laughing a little. "Of course." "He studied the stars," Lily called from the base of the tree, without looking up. "It made sense." "She can hear everything," Ethan said. "I have good hearing," Lily said. "You say that like it's a surprise every time." Vanessa was shaking her head, smiling. and she reached over without ceremony and took his hand, the way you take someone's hand when it's already yours. Not a gesture, just a fact. He turned his palm up to hold hers. The afternoon light was doing the October thing, where it goes golden and sideways and makes even ordinary places look like they've been lit deliberately. The oak tree threw a long shadow across the path. The lamppost stood where it had always stood, bent and reliable, waiting for the evening. Quiet. They stayed in the park until it started getting dark. Lily had collected 7 acorns and 3 interesting-looking stones in a leaf she described as structurally unusual, which she carried in her jacket pocket alongside the notebook she kept there now, the constellation one, because she'd started noting other things in it too. Natural phenomena, observations about people, things that seemed worth recording because she'd decided at 8 years old that the world was full of data that most people forgot to write down. Walking back out through the east entrance, through the gold trees, Lily between them again, Ethan felt the weight of the afternoon settling into something he could carry comfortably. The park, the bench, the lamppost, the laugh, the hand in his. All of it ordinary in the way of things that have finally stopped requiring effort. At the gate, Lily stopped and looked back at the bench, visible from the entrance, small in the distance. "We should come back," she said. "In winter and spring, so we see it in every season." "That's a good idea," Vanessa said. "Then we'll know what it looks like always," Lily said, as if this was obvious, and turned and walked through the gate and out onto the street. Ethan looked at Vanessa. She looked back at him, and in the look was everything that had accumulated: the restaurant and the sidewalk and the train and the coffee shops and the farmer's market and the board meeting and the kitchen and the birthday and 4 months of Renner and the back porch and this bench, this afternoon, this park in October gold. He squeezed her hand once. She squeezed back. They walked through the gate. The thing about starting over, and this is the part that doesn't get said enough, the part that the clean versions of this story leave out, is that it doesn't feel like starting over. It doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like continuing. Like the story you've been living has changed its direction without changing its nature. And you're still the same person carrying the same history, only now you're carrying it somewhere instead of in circles. Ethan Mercer was 32 years old, and he had loved a woman who died and raised a daughter who was too smart for him and spent 4 years being as okay as he could manage. He was not a different person for what had happened in the past 8 months. He was the same person, with the same flaws Marcus had been patiently cataloging for a decade, the same tendency to internalize, the same difficulty with subtext, the same habit of measuring things structurally when the emotional version of the measurement would serve him better. But he was awake again, in the way that sleep doesn't fix, and that Lily had named before he could. He was present in the rooms he occupied. He laughed more. Not performed laughter, not the social variety, but the kind that catches you when you're not looking, the kind that Lily and Vanessa produced in him with a frequency that still surprised him. Vanessa Sterling was 27 years old, and she had built something extraordinary and defended it at cost, and learned that worth was not the same as acknowledgement, and that efficiency was not the same as strength. She was not a softer person for what had happened. She was not transformed into someone warmer or more open in the way stories sometimes require their guarded characters to become. She was still sharp and careful, and prone to compartmentalizing and allergic to anything that felt like performance, including performed tenderness. She still checked the floor before she put her weight down. But she checked it, and then she put her weight down, which was different from before. She asked for what she needed more often than she used to, imperfectly, sometimes after a delay that was longer than it should have been. She said things out loud that she'd previously processed alone in the efficiency of her own head. She called Ethan at 7 a.m. when she was thinking about something and wanted to say it before the day got loud, which had become, without either of them narrating the change, a habit. Lily had 14 constellations and 7 acorns and a notebook full of observations and a telescope named Copernicus and a woman who looked things up to be ready for her questions. She had what she'd always had, a father who was present in the imperfect, complete way of someone who had decided that being there was the main thing. And she had something new, which she'd filed under the category of V in her internal record keeping, which was not a romantic category or a maternal one or any label she'd tried to apply. Just a person she was glad was in the house when she was in the house. A person who meant what she said when she said she was interested. A person who admitted not knowing things and then actually found out. At 8 years old, Lily understood something that had taken most of the adults around her considerably longer. That people are not what they represent themselves to be in the first 5 minutes. They are what they do in the small moments, the accumulated moments, the moments they don't think anyone's recording. She'd been recording them all, in her notebook, in her memory, in the careful way she had of filing information and waiting to see if it held. V had held. So it was Marcus who said it first, which was appropriate because Marcus had earned the right to say things first. He said it in November at his and Jen's apartment, at a dinner that had somehow become a regular thing. The four of them, quarterly if schedules allowed, Lily left with Mrs. Petrakis, who had accepted this responsibility with the gravity of someone with a sacred duty. Marcus said it between the main course and dessert, with the directness of a man who had been a corporate attorney for long enough that he'd stopped seeing the point of saying things sideways. "You know," he said, looking between Ethan and Vanessa with the particular look he got when he was about to say something he'd been thinking about for a while. "I've known Ethan since he was 23 years old and made terrible decisions about coffee and had a desk so disorganized that I thought there might be structural damage underneath it. And I've never once—" He paused, and Ethan braced. "I've never once seen him look like someone who's not counting down to when the good thing ends." Silence at the table. "Marcus?" Jen said. "No, he should hear it." Marcus looked at Ethan. "You look different. You've looked different for months. You're not waiting for it to go wrong." Ethan looked at the table. He didn't argue. "And you," Marcus said, turning to Vanessa, who raised her eyebrows. "You came to my office 2 years ago to review a contract, and you were the most composed person I'd ever met. Like nothing could get inside. And now you're—" He gestured. "I'm what?" she said. "You're here," he said. "You're just here, in the room, not managing it." Vanessa held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at Ethan. Something moved between them in the look, something that didn't need language. "He's insufferable," she said. "He's known me since I was 23, Ethan said. "He's earned it." Jen raised her glass. "To insufferable friends," she said. They drank to that. There is a particular kind of love, and the word is the right word, even if neither of them had said it yet, even if they were still in the approach to it. That is not about fireworks or revelation. It doesn't arrive on a schedule. It's the love that shows up at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday with too strong tea for someone who's reading documents she's already read 3 times. It's the love that learns what someone needs before they know how to ask for it and provides it without making a ceremony. It's the love that stays when staying is harder than leaving and chooses the hard thing without calling it a sacrifice. It's the love that sits on a wet bench in the rain and talks about nothing because silence would be worse. Ethan had known this kind of love once. He'd thought, after, that once was what people got. One configuration of it, specific to a time and a person, and then that was the shape of the container and nothing else would fit. He'd been wrong. Not in a way that diminished what he'd had. In a way that said, the capacity for it doesn't die with the person it was for. It waits. It does something else while it waits, raises a daughter, builds structures, learns to carry weight, but it waits. Vanessa had not known this kind of love before. She'd known versions of it, partial configurations, things that had the right components, but the wrong proportions. She'd known love that asked her to be smaller. Love that appreciated the achievements, but couldn't sit comfortably beside the person behind them. Love that lasted until the difficulty arrived and then discovered it had other plans. She hadn't known love that looked at the difficulty and said, "I'm on your side." Not strategically, just on your side. She was learning it now. Not smoothly. She was constitutionally incapable of smooth, which was something she'd finally stopped apologizing for, but genuinely, in the incremental, accumulating way of someone who has decided that the floor will hold and is walking on it anyway. On a Saturday in December, 3 days before Lily's school winter break, they went back to the park. Lily had insisted. She'd said they were completing the seasonal record. It was cold, the real cold now, the kind that had teeth. And the park was mostly empty, the trees bare, the ground hard, the light flat and pale. The bench was there. The lamppost was there. The bent arm was there, the light already on in the early afternoon dark of December. They sat on the bench, all three of them. Lily was between them again, her hands in her pockets, her breath visible in the cold air, looking at the lamppost with the focused attention she brought to things she'd decided were important. "It still points the wrong way," she said. "It always has," Ethan said, "but the light still works." She looked at it. "That's actually better, I think. If it pointed the right way, it would just be another lamppost." She paused. "This one is specific." He looked at Vanessa over Lily's head. She was looking at the lamppost too, and then she looked at him, and he saw what he'd been seeing for months. The careful person learning to be less careful, the defended person learning that her defenses were not the same as her strength. And he thought, say it. "You're constitutionally incapable of subtext." She was warned. "I love you," he said. Not loud, just to her, across Lily, in the December cold with the bad lamppost and the bare tree and the pale light, just the fact, plainly stated. Lily went very still. She did not look up. She appeared to an outside observer to be studying the lamppost with unusual intensity, but there was something about the way she'd gone still that said she was listening to every atom of this moment and filing it away in the notebook she kept in her head. Vanessa looked at him. Her eyes were bright, not from the cold, or not only from the cold. "I love you," she said back. Simple. No decoration. The real thing without the performance of it. Lily exhaled a long breath that made a visible cloud in the cold air. "Okay," she said, in the voice of someone who has been waiting for a thing to be said and is relieved it's been said. "Okay, good." She looked at the lamppost again. "That took a while." "Lily," Ethan started, "I'm just saying." She shrugged, deeply unconcerned. "It's December. You met in March." She looked between them. "That's 9 months. That's a reasonable amount of time, but also you could have said it sooner." She returned to the lamppost. "Anyway, I'm glad." Vanessa made the sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more than a laugh. She pressed the back of her hand briefly against her mouth and then put it back in her pocket. 9 months, she said to Ethan. "She's right," he said. "She's usually right." "I know." Vanessa looked at Lily, at this child who had received her with apple testing and questions about bees and a note tucked inside a telescope box, who had named the telescope Copernicus and V in her notebook, and who had just said, "I'm glad," with the complete, unchoreographed honesty of someone who meant it entirely. Lily looked up. "Thank you," Vanessa said, "for the thing you said about being glad." Lily considered her. "You're easy to be glad about," she said, with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone who has evaluated the question and reached a conclusion. "When you're actually here." She looked back at the lamppost, which is most of the time now. Ethan looked at the bench they were sitting on, the old wood, worn smooth by years of weather and people, unchanged since a rainy night a decade ago, when two strangers had sat at opposite ends of it and not known each other's names. He looked at the lamppost that had been here longer than any of them and would probably be here longer still, bent arm and all, lighting up the wrong patch of sky and doing its job regardless. He thought about 10 years, about the distance between that night and this one, the long, straight distance of it, all the days in between that had led here without seeming to lead anywhere in particular, about how it is impossible to see, from inside a hard night, that the night is also the beginning of something, about how you can be carrying something toward a person for a decade without knowing it, and they can be carrying something toward you, and the distance keeps closing even when you're standing still. He thought about what it had taken, not the dramatic things, the revelation and the board meeting and the 4 months of documents, but the small things, staying on the bench, answering the phone, making pasta badly and letting someone watch, saying the honest thing instead of the managed thing. Showing up on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock with tea you made wrong for a person who needed it right. None of it had been perfect. All of it had been real. There is no clean version of this, he thought. There never is. You don't get to choose whether the things that happen to you hurt. You get to choose what you do while they're happening and what you do after. You get to choose whether the weight you've been carrying becomes the thing that keeps you standing or the thing that keeps you still. Some days you choose wrong. Some days you sit in a driveway for 11 minutes and can't go inside. Some days you pull back when you should say things, and you have a friend smart enough to name it and a daughter patient enough to wait. But you also get to choose to sit down on a bench, to stay, to talk about nothing because the nothing is what's needed, to pick up the phone, to show up, small choices, every time. That's the whole of it. The December light was going. The lamppost brightened as the afternoon darkened, its light falling sideways across the bench, the wrong angle, the familiar wrong angle. And Lily stood up and brushed off her coat with the efficiency of someone wrapping up a scheduled stop and ready for the next one. "We should get hot chocolate," she said. "For the record, I'm noting that we visited the bench in spring, fall, and now winter. We still need summer." "Summer it is," Vanessa said. "And then we'll have all four." Lily looked satisfied with this plan. "It'll be a complete record." She started toward the path. Ethan and Vanessa stood from the bench. He took one more look at it. The worn wood, the lamppost, the tree above it bare and patient in the cold. And then he took Vanessa's hand, and they followed Lily out of the park and into the December street where the city was lit and moving and entirely indifferent to the small fact that three people had just decided to be a family. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a decision, made in the cold, on a bench that had been here a long time and would go on being here. The lamppost came on fully as they walked away, its light doing what it had always done, pointing slightly wrong, illuminating what it could from the angle it had, which was enough. It had always been enough. Some things hold not because they're perfect. They hold because they're still there. That's the whole of it. That's all it ever is.